There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
It's not about alcohol. It's about learning to love the person who comes after alcohol. And that may take some time, which is why people do it for a year or 1 month or all these times. But it's a long-term sobriety that leads you into finding out what you're made of.
From Mamamia, I'm Kate Langbroek and you're listening to No Filter. For many people, alcohol is an easy way out of difficult feelings. And it's such a widely accepted social habit that it can catch up with you before you realise it. What were you doing in your teen years? When did you have your first drink? Victoria Vanstone was 11. She was a wild party girl for most of her life, the one that was always trying to make everybody else's night memorable. You know the kind. But she barely remembered what happened herself because she would drink way past the point of return and repeat most weekends. She disguised her drinking problem with travel. She travelled for 10 years and collected endless drunk stories. Now, we all have a party persona, but how far do you take it and why? Because ultimately, you can't run away from yourself. Victoria's now 46, has 3 kids and is 6 years sober. She has the most raw, compelling and funny sobriety stories. Well, actually, they're drunk stories.
It was never that one beer. It was 2 beers, 3 beers, shots, and finding my nan's bottle of port under the sink and tripping over and being sick and having anxiety.
But it's definitely not all funny. Some of the things that happened to Victoria throughout her younger years would have scared a lot of people out of drinking ever again. Like the time she was drugged in Byron Bay, or when she went into a year-long psychosis after a big night, or when she blew her finger off with a firecracker. But nothing, it seemed, could stop Victoria. She was a party girl. It was her identity that flourished from high school to university.
I was at a nightclub. I just snorted a line of cocaine off a DJ's turntable. This girl was standing opposite me and she said, "Oh, you're Vic that's always drunk and completely off your trolley, aren't you?"
Then came motherhood and more drinking and partying and more wasted days being brutally hungover.
I'd used my happy coins the night before and I had payback every Sunday.
I found Victoria's story, of course, very interesting but also relatable. And a major theme of hers in her life and her drinking was that she was always more invested in being in the service of others, making sure that other people were having a great time, that they were having fun, that they thought that she was fun, rather than serving her essential self, who was kind of dying inside her. It's a trap. It's a trap particularly for women, and it's a trap that often seems to be unlocked by booze. Here is Victoria Vanstone. Victoria Vanstone, when you tell your story, I actually had to do a double take because you've written it, you've flipped between the past and the present.
Yeah.
And when you talk about as a girl growing up in England, when you started drinking, I got such a shock because there are these numbers under those chapters in your youth. And then I realised that was your age.
Yeah.
And I'm like, she started boozing at 12.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I watched on from afar for a very long time. I have 3 older siblings and everybody was rebelling before me. My sister is 13 years older, a brother who's 10 years older and a sister who's 4 years older. So they were all kind of getting into the party scene way before me. And my house, in the book, I describe it in a street full of darkness. My house was the glittering disco ball. There was never any out of the comfort zone drinking. There was never any alone drinking. it was always frivolous and joyful. And all I wanted to do was kind of join in this cheerful pandemonium that my family created around me. It was kind of like I felt like I needed to carry the family mantle high and be the best possible party person I could.
And you did that.
Yes, I did it.
You started by stealing your parents' booze.
I used to hang out at the drinks cabinet each weekend. As soon as my parents had friends round for a party, I would be sneaking booze from the drinks cabinet or from the garage. They had a huge pile of it everywhere. Booze was everywhere. So I just thought, right, I've got to get in. I've got to make everyone proud by proving that I can be a really good drinker. And it was just my way of being accepted and making friends and keeping friends. So I started at a really young age, Kate.
That kind of formed a large part of your identity early, was that you were this kind of maverick girl, the fun girl, the wild girl who could be relied on for a good time with your mates from school.
Absolutely. I knew that if I could drink well, I had something that I could give people. Maybe I was a bit self-conscious or didn't think I was good enough in certain areas. I don't know why, but I knew that if I could do this one thing well as make people laugh, then people would always like me. I was a lot of a people pleaser all my life, I think. And I just wanted to make others happy, which I do now still in different forms. I'm still that person who's trying to get the punchline in, but it gave me a tool, like a friendship tool where I could say, look, I'm your girl. If you want cigarettes, laughs and booze, this is the place to come. I'm going to entertain you and you're going to leave here going, isn't Vic a brilliant laugh? And that carried on throughout my life. It became my entire identity was the one that could be the last man standing on any grubby dance floor across the world. That was my persona.
And particularly at that age, you know, when you're a teenager, you're looking for that currency with your friends. You're looking for what you can bring to the table that's going to mark you as different. Why do you think it seemed like such a good choice for you, even at that age? Like your friends weren't doing it, but you were.
I don't think there was a choice. I never had a choice. That's something I hope to give my children by not drinking now. I never had a choice to drink or not to drink. I'm not saying that people forced it upon me or that my parents even allowed it. They didn't. I was brought up in a culture, an environment where drinking is normal. When something is so normalized, it gets diluted in the crowd and sort of it disappears. Any question, any choice becomes irrelevant because I didn't have a choice. I just knew that this is what I should be doing. All I could see around me, my little child brain was absorbing, drinking is fun. Drinking is what people do to relax. Drinking makes people happy. They were the messages that I was getting from a very young age. So actually, I don't think it was about choice. It was just about me growing up, absorbing what was going on around me and just doing what everybody else was doing. And that's the problem with normalized social binge drinking culture, is that you can't step out of it. It's like stepping out of the crowd. You know, it's like stepping away from the tribe, which we're sort of taught not to do. And that's what I felt. I was just following in the footsteps of everything, even media. Everything that was being shown to me was like, this is okay. There was never anything like smoking, you know, the advertising saying this is bad for you. It was just like, look, this is how we celebrate. This is how we feel joy. So there was never a matter of choice. It was just like, well, I need to learn how to do this well. And then I'm going to fit in and everyone's going to like me. So I think I discovered it as a way of not only having fun, but to not worry about life anymore. And I think I was reaching an age where I was starting to get concerned about what am I going to do? And what if boys don't like me? And do I look okay? And it's just an easy way out of all of those feelings.
And when did you start to get a niggle that even though it all seemed like great fun, that it wasn't necessarily serving you?
I'm embarrassed to say that it took me probably 26 years to work out that booze wasn't really my mate.
Oh,
yeah.
The 1,000 Sundays.
The 1,000 Sundays and the cheeky Tuesdays.
You tell a story in the book which manages to be both very funny, a very funny book, and also heart-rending book. And it's when I think you were 14 and your two best girlfriends at school and you'd been apart for the holidays and you came back, you were really looking forward to seeing them, you'd brought presents for them and they ran away from you like in the schoolyard, properly ran away from you. Why did they run away from you?
I had no idea at the time. They've reached out in recent years and apologised and said they didn't know either. But when you're 14 and you have your two best friends in the whole world, they really are your world. They're your everything. And I loved those two girls and I thought we'd grow old together. And I came back from holiday and they never spoke to me again. I realise now that trauma is relative. You know, I don't have huge trauma in my life, but there was something in that moment that made me feel very, very sad. And I was sad for a while and I questioned myself for the first time. I thought, gosh, I've done something wrong. My two best friends don't want to know me anymore. And I think it was the first time I really questioned myself. I'd always been a very, very confident child. You know, I was the class joker and the life and soul for all of these years. And all of a sudden, someone was telling me that I wasn't good enough. Them turning their backs on me was a very clear sign that actually I wasn't who I thought I was. And I began to question myself. And of course, at that stage of my life, I wasn't going to go to therapy or talk to my mum about it. Of course, my parents were as devastated as I was because they had to send me to school every day knowing that I didn't have any mates anymore. Girls at school is a really tough time. I was pretty traumatized by that situation. And of course, the only way I knew how to feel better was to drink. So I think there was a real turning point there, whereas my drinking went from being very frivolous and good time girl to actually me numbing out a little bit of pain. And as I said, I didn't really work that out until I went to therapy years and years later. But that really is a turning point for me of going, okay, this is the fun girl. And now this is perhaps someone who is trying to numb out and anesthetize some hurt and a bit of a broken heart. So I became the person that people knew was always going to be out all night. Even from the age of 14, 15, 16, I used alcohol to make me more confident with boys, which led to some like kind of horrible run-ins with spotty Lynx deodorant covered teenage boys. I just think I lost my confidence a little bit. And I just knew that if you bought me a pint and a packet of crisps, I was more wild and more approachable and funny, I guess. I just thought it gave me something extra, which of course it just made me a dribbling mess, but took me too long to realise that.
Hey, what were you drinking? You were still nicking booze at this point from your parents.
Yeah.
But what were you drinking?
I was drinking anything I could get my hands on. So as soon as someone wasn't looking, I'd be grabbing a bottle of red wine. We'd be paying people to go into the off license, the bottle shop, as you call it over here. We'd be doing anything to get our hands on alcohol in those days. We used to steal my dad's beers. We're stealing what we could get our hands on. It didn't matter about the taste or the quality or the vintage. It didn't make any difference. I just had to get alcohol in my face in some way. It could have been vodka, gin. It just didn't matter.
I mean, I suppose all teenagers are really good at hiding things from their parents. Like that's really their job, isn't it? But your parents were living with their daughter who was often brutally hungover.
Yeah.
And they didn't know.
No, definitely not. No, we kept it.
How?
Oh, just because I'd be off to school I wasn't drinking every day. It was just kind of the teenage binges in those days at the weekends. We used to sleep over at a mate's house. It was very normal teenage drinking, I would say. It wasn't anything my parents would be worried about. It was just what it led to, me having this identity, which later on, especially when I left home, led to more outrageous behavior, which meant I could drink more often without anybody noticing. I think that's why I went off traveling and went off to uni, is because I needed to plonk myself in environments where I didn't stand out of the crowd, which is why I spent a lot of my time with people who drank as much as I did, because I didn't want somebody to pick me out and go, oh, you've got a problem. So I sort of absorbed myself amongst people who did have problems as well. So yeah, my parents would never have said it was okay for me to drink. But what they did see was very, very normal teenage drinking at a birthday party where they'd have to pick me up and I'd vomit out of the car and we'd sort of laugh about it the next day. So they never ever had anything to worry about because all the other kids in my street were doing the same thing.
And then you talked about when you went to uni. So the drinking kind of continued and became, would you say it was like a normal for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially that first year at university. I mean, my parents dropped me off with a sign that said free beer here. that's the kind of reputation I wanted to keep and they wanted me to keep.
The family coat of arms.
Yeah, it really is a brilliant explanation. Yeah, it was the family coat of arms. So people knew straight away not where to come to study, but where to come to smoke a spliff and have a bottle of wine. Unfortunately, I didn't last very long at university, as you can probably imagine.
Yes. And was that the time where you had the first major kind of breakdown?
Yep. So I left university quite early on. I was only there for about 5 months. The only thing I learned how to do was to down a pint of snake bite and black, which is beer, cider and blackcurrant in less than 3 seconds. So I was like the Luton champion. I think once I got that coat of arms, I was like, right, I'm done here. I'm going to the next town. So I actually moved down to Brighton and I worked in a pub and I had some really lovely mates. And what came along with my over drinking, I would say, was, of course, in the mid-90s, there was a lot of ecstasy around, a lot of cocaine. And when my inhibitions were out of the window, of course, that just led to me using drugs recreationally. Everybody was. It was the rave scene. It was the 90s. We used to go clubbing all the time. And that started to develop every weekend, me going out, getting drunk, and then being passed whatever drug it was and taking it and thinking I was having a good time. But that really escalated for me very, very quickly to the point where I was taking more than everybody else. I was unstoppable and invincible. It was just my party persona taken to the next extreme. I started to take too many drugs. And then one night I just completely overdid it and had a massive panic attack. Like I'd never felt any anxiety before in my life. I was a really confident person. I was burning the candle at both ends and it resulted in me having a year of complete mental breakdown.
What was going on with you at the time? It was a form of agoraphobia. You were scared to leave the house. You were having these panic attacks. What was your mental process at the time? Had you joined the pieces together at that point and attributed it to drinking?
I attributed it to taking drugs. I never once considered it being drinking, but I did stop drinking for a year that year, trying to make myself better. I was having panic attacks all day, every day. I couldn't leave the house. I felt like something had gone wrong in my brain and I couldn't be the person that everybody wanted me to be. The party girl was gone. And when I looked in the mirror, all I saw was a really sad and scared girl who'd completely destroyed her life. I'd had to move back in with my parents. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't be the person that I was. And it was frightening for me. It was scary not being able to go out and be normal and act normal. I felt like a recluse and I couldn't get better. And it was really, really frightening for me. In the end, I ended up, telling my parents what I'd been doing. Like I've been taking drugs and I've completely overdone it and I'm really feeling unwell. And I ended up getting some therapy and going on some medication. And after a year, finally getting my mental equilibrium back on the level and being okay again. And of course, me being okay, my one goal when I was really seriously mentally ill in my early 20s back then was to sit in a pub and have a pint with my mates. That was my one thing. It's like, if I can sit in a pub and have a pint and be normal, then I am me again. So that's how ingrained it was in my identity. Even though I'd been mentally ill for a year, I still was wanting to use booze as my reward for being okay again.
Up next, Victoria tells me about something that would happen to her every time she went out. No matter how resolute she was that it wouldn't happen, she would black out most of the time and then have the fear of the unknown.
I remember in the morning, I felt shame and regret. And I used to hold the sheet up to my chin as the guy had written a fake phone number on a beer mat and go, oh, right, is this all I'm worth is a fake phone number?
Stay with us. I've had a lot of friends who have recently stopped drinking, or they're doing that thing where they're like, let's do it for a month and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kicks over into another month. And a lot of them talk about the trigger for them was the anxiety that they were feeling.
Yeah.
Anxiety and alcohol, it seems to have the opposite effect from what you start using it for.
Yeah, absolutely.
How were you functioning outside of the glory times when you were at the pub? Where were you in your life? What were you dreaming for yourself?
I was very stunted in my life. I was trying to find the party. I wasn't interested in jobs or careers, or I was a wild child, I guess, especially after I moved out of home. I wasn't interested in the normal, mundane parts of life. I was interested in who had the next line and who was organising the next illegal rave or party or nightclub, or I just wasn't interested in a normal life. I was like, oh, this is boring. Like, who would be sober? I just couldn't get my head round any of it because it was all I had. I didn't know who I was if I wasn't dancing next to a speaker. I had no idea, and it was too frightening for me to delve into that. So I didn't. I just carried on. When I felt better, I packed all my problems, all of my promiscuity and over drinking into a backpack and went off traveling around the world.
So when you'd wake up in the morning after, say, one of those big benders and an unfortunate encounter with a guy that you didn't even necessarily want to be with.
Yeah.
Like, what was that feeling in the morning?
The frivolous drinking got soaked up by the morning. If the guy had left, I sort of would laugh it off to my mates in the pub the next day over a Bloody Mary. But I remember in the morning, I felt shame and regret. And I used to hold the sheet up to my chin as the guy had written a fake phone number on a beer mat and go, oh, right, is this all I'm worth, is a fake phone number? And so, of course, I drank that feeling away. I never really considered that I was doing damage to myself. I just thought, well, this is kind of ladette culture. We can sleep with people and it's okay. But I was smart enough to know that it wasn't good for me and that I wasn't enjoying it. And I was just doing it because everybody else seemed to be doing it. It never really felt good. I never felt a sense of joy or achievement. And I had this problem where I always drank to blackout when I went out. So I never really knew what I'd done the night before. So I had this thing which I called the fear of the unknown, which in the end caused all those panic attacks. I never really knew what I'd done. So I used to wake up in the morning and go, not only have I got some weird bloke that's just shut the front door, but I've got no memory of who I was with, who I danced with. Did I offend anyone? Did I fall over? Why have I got a cut on my chin? Which I had most Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings because I used to attempt the swan dive, which is like the caterpillar thing, which I couldn't do at all. I thought I was so funny that I used to kind of dive onto the dance floor and every weekend had this kind of gaping wound on my chin. So in the moment, I didn't care. But all of those feelings, they didn't last. It was that come down afterwards. It had to be dealt with. I'd used my happy coins the night before and I had payback every Sunday.
Because it was so important to you and you're naturally an effervescent, fun, humorous person, that you meet a girl when you go back to uni, I think, and she sums you up in a way that you had not thought that you were representing yourself to others in the world.
Yeah, I remember I was at a nightclub. I just snorted a line of cocaine off a DJ's turntable and I turned around and this girl was standing opposite me and she said, oh, hi. And I was like, oh, hello. And she said, oh, you're Vic that's always drunk and completely off your trolley, aren't you? And I was absolutely astounded because I just thought, even though it was obvious what I'd just been doing, I thought everybody thought of me as cool and fun. I thought, everybody loves me. I'm the funny one. I'm the one that's the good partier. And it was the first time anyone had ever tapped me on the shoulder and said, what you're doing is out of control. And actually, I left university the next day. It was that confronting for me that I wasn't good enough for this girl and that I had a reputation that I actually went, right, I need to get out of here. People think I'm a loon. I've got to get out. And of course, I didn't deal with the situation as I did when I went traveling. I packed all of my problems into my suitcase, headed off down the M25 and took them with me.
The thing is, you can't run away from yourself, which is what a lot of your story is about, isn't it? You tried just about everywhere in the world to run to.
I certainly did. I went and lived in Thailand for a while. I had bars, obviously. I traveled to Cambodia, to America, all over the world for 10 years on my own, backpacking the world and living in various places. Traveling is a really good disguise for minor drinking issue, or major, perhaps some of those stories, they resulted in a lot of red flags being whipped across my face throughout those years. Again, the promiscuity, dangerous situations. I put myself at risk very often. I didn't think about my own self-worth. And as I said, I abandoned my body. I think I had low self-esteem. So therefore, if someone liked me, if a man that I met and he was good looking and he liked me, it was kind of a hit of adrenaline for me to go, oh, I'm good enough now. So therefore, I'm going to give him my body in return for him liking me. There was never any thought about me, about myself, about being kind to my body. It was like, I'm drunk, somebody likes me, I'll sleep with them, then I'll move to the next town if he goes weird. There was never really any thought to anything that I did. I just thought, I'm a good time girl, I'm having fun, and I'm traveling around the world. There was never any repercussions to my behavior, so it just carried on.
Even though you say a lot of your behaviours were really dangerous and a lot of the situations you found yourself in were dangerous, how dangerous? How close did you come?
Well, I remember backpacking in Byron Bay one year and I got my drink spiked and my friends found me with a guy on top of me and they just pulled him away just in time before anything horrible happened. I don't remember any of it. And that was me putting myself at a party where I didn't know anyone, accepting a drink of somebody I'd never met before. Things like that, where I was very, very close. I had a really nasty situation biting at my ankles, waiting to happen. I ended up blowing my finger off with a firework. I got arrested one time. Loads of things, loads of really major things. You know, being led down a dark alleyway by a bloke I'd met an hour before and going to his bungalow and spending the night there. I can't imagine my children doing something like that. I just didn't care about myself. And that was a side effect of my drinking and my low self-esteem from that situation at school. It just didn't matter what I was doing. And as the behavior perpetuated, I became less caring about myself. There was never a rock bottom or enough of a red flag to go, look inwards, look at what you're doing to yourself. You are worth more than this, because it just carried on.
Was it because you were in such a constant state of chaos, you didn't really have a barometer for normal?
Absolutely. The more crazy, the better. Because I wanted to be able to tell a story. I'm a storyteller. I had diaries in those days. I've still got them now. They're these bulging books of stories, which I've used. They've been very useful in recent years. But I just wanted to be able to wake up the next day, gather my friends around me and go, this is what happened, and laugh about it. That's how much regard I had for myself.
Now, things are often very clear in retrospect. So you talk about the red flags. And when I read your book, I'm like, there's a red flag, right? So you've worked them out. But at the time, why could you not see them?
I was just too sozzled. I was too fried. My whole persona was based upon this person. So how could I ever change being who I was? I didn't know that the person that sits here in front of you today even existed. So I couldn't tap into it. My only choice was to continue being who people expected. It's a lot about expectation, I think. Who was I in my family if I said I didn't drink? Who was I to my friends if I wasn't the life and soul of the party? It wasn't a question I was prepared to look into. And I hated sober people. I didn't want them around me. I didn't want someone to remember my behavior, most of all.
Wow.
If I couldn't remember it, I didn't want someone else to remember it. So sobriety was not on my radar. I just thought eventually I've got to do this well. Even though I started to get terrible anxiety from drinking again later on in life, I never thought I've got to stop this. I just thought I need to do this better. I need to have water between wines. I need to learn moderation. I just need to be a better drinker so that I can keep being the person that I am and the person that people expect me to be.
Because you were a drinker and that was so much of your identity, I find it really interesting that you went from the UK, massive drinking culture, and came to Australia, big drinkers, very welcome. Was there thought behind that?
Yeah, I immersed myself in culture. I don't think there was a thought there. I don't think it would have mattered, Kate, where I went. I managed to find the party on a pile of mud. All you needed to do was give me some fairy lights, pass me a bottle opener, and I could create a party. I could have been in a non-drinking country. I think even I went to India, actually, where the alcohol is banned, and I used to drink beer out of a teapot because that's how they drink beer over there, because you can't do it in public. So actually, it wouldn't have mattered whether I was in England, Australia, or it wouldn't have mattered. I would have found a way to party. That was who I was. There was nothing to do with the culture or the environment, which is what I discovered. It was always me, Kate. It wasn't an influential thing from outsiders. And that's what I had to come to terms with eventually, was that it was my hand coming from my body, reaching out into the fridge for that bottle of cheap Chardonnay. It was always coming from me.
I mean, you were who you are. The essence of you is this amazing, fun, funny, lively person. Because in the midst of all this mayhem, when you came to Australia, you reconnected with the one guy who'd been really nice at uni.
Yep.
John. You weren't dry then, you were still drinking. And he fell in love with you and you him.
Yeah. I think by that point, I had been living out of a bag for 10 years. I'd travelled the world, and I remember sitting on a beach in Thailand and looking at another beautiful sunset and wondering, what else is there? You know, I've seen a lot of sunsets and a lot of beaches and I've had a good time, but what is there? What makes people happy? I remember questioning it, and I'd had a few disastrous relationships en route. I just decided I wanted a bit of normality. I wanted to see what people did on Friday nights. I wanted to queue up at a post office and talk about mortgages. I just wanted to have a glimpse into a normal lifestyle. That sounds odd, but I had just been backpacking forever. I flew into Australia and I thought, right, maybe that would be a good place for me to settle down. I'd always wanted to have children, even amongst all of this chaos. I knew that I wanted to be a mum one day. And, oh, that makes me cry. Sorry. Sorry.
Why does that make you cry?
I just think I put it aside because of what others expected of me. And I think all along, I just wanted to be happy and just be a mum and just be a good mum. And like, I just created all of this chaos around me all the time. And like, it sort of got pushed aside, all the things that I wanted. It still makes me cry now, no matter how many times I tell my story, is that I pushed aside a lot of what makes me happy for the sake of others. And it was very, very detrimental to my mental health in the end, because I gave myself away. It just feels very unfair. And I sort of crying with joy because I realize now that I was able to see that then. Even though I was still drinking, I was able to see, look, I just want to meet a kind person, somebody who accepts me for me, somebody who will love me for who I am and can set the party girl aside, and I can stand in her shadow and still be enough.
There's something I think about serving your essential self. And in many ways, you kind of have to fight for your life sometimes to almost protect your essential self from what you've put around it. And it seems like that's what you were doing.
Yeah, that's an incredible way of describing it. That's exactly what I was doing, but I just didn't realize it. I didn't know, and it took me another few years after meeting John and us getting married and me getting pregnant and all of those things that happened. It still took me a while to look beyond myself, to look at me from above and go, actually, this isn't working for you anymore. This lifestyle is causing you to have issues, and you need to take a look into it.
When you looked at yourself from above, what did you look like?
I had a baby. I had a beautiful baby boy. I got pregnant 3 months before my wedding. My wedding was my first ever sober party. I couldn't drink because I was pregnant. Of course, I stopped drinking straight away. I remember looking around going, all right, everyone's completely wasted and I'm all right. I'm enjoying myself and I'm okay with it. And it was like this brilliant excuse not to get drunk for the first time. And I thought, I can't drink and I can say no. And there was some power in that. Not enough for me to stop after the baby was born, but there was power in me, personal power. No, I didn't show it to anybody else. I just thought, okay, there's a little window here. This is interesting. After the baby was born, I found it quite mundane being a new mum. I'd found the transition from being a party girl to being a mum quite difficult. I'd been traveling the world. I was independent with no responsibilities to then having this one massive responsibility. I loved my baby more than anything else in the world. But the stress of that, the stress of having this life dependent on me made me find a mother's group and go crazy at the weekends. I was like, this is going to be my reward. I can start drinking again. This is what mummy wine culture is. We're allowed to have a reward at the end of a mummying week. Parenthood became an excuse for my drinking to develop in other ways, this kind of real mummy binge drinking culture. And that continued until I got pregnant again. I started drinking all the time, not every day. We're talking about a very social, normalized binge drinking issue that I had. I never drank every day. I never drank in the morning, but it was still an issue because it started to cause me massive anxiety. So not only did I go out and drink, the next day after my son was born, I had a baby crying in the room beyond my hangover. In the room next door to me, there was a baby, and I was so hungover that I couldn't even move my head, let alone go in there and hold my child. I couldn't breastfeed him. I couldn't do anything. And I had to say to my husband, I can't do it today. I am so ill. And that went on for a surprising amount of time, probably 4 years, where I was trying to moderate. But the anxiety that I got from not being able to look after my child became worse and worse every time I drank, to the point where I was regressing into that 22-year-old girl with the drug overdose every weekend. And I'd get better by Wednesday, and I'd be at happy hour at Thursday, and the whole drinking cycle in parenthood began.
You and John seem to be happy in this period. You must have discussed it subsequently, or maybe even at the time. Like, what was he seeing?
He saw how drinking made me very mentally unwell the following day. No one else saw that. They saw me out having a good time, probably being a bit wobbly, maybe rushing to the toilet to be sick. They saw somebody who was fun but probably overdid it a bit. He saw somebody that thought they were dying from anxiety every Sunday morning. He saw someone lying in bed with their finger on their pulse going, I'm having a panic attack, I'm going to die. So his face, his loving face, I describe it in the book, it started to change. When I used to go out, he used to sort of smile and say goodbye. It started to change to a face of concern and worry. Because I would go out and say, I'm just staying out for one, I'll be back at 10 o'clock. But of course, once one was down the hatch, I was buying the bottle and then buying shots. That's just how me and booze worked. So I always overdid it. And then I'd come home and he would have to deal with me being mentally unwell the next day. And it must have been frightening for him.
It's interesting that with your son, the first time, your first period of sobriety, really, it seemed that having children was almost a solution for you because you knew in that period that you would not drink.
Yeah. And it was a lovely period because—
That's amazing.
Well, funnily enough, during my first pregnancy, I actually wrote a series of children's books I'd never written before. I'd written emails and things, and I knew that I could make people laugh with the way that I structured a sentence. But I thought it was because I wasn't drinking or the hormones or something. But whatever happened during my first pregnancy, I started writing. My brain started working. And I was like, oh, this pregnancy thing's good. You know, my brain's working and I can do things that I've never done before. And I feel really alive. Actually, it was because I wasn't drinking. I'd been numbing out for so many years that I didn't know what it felt like for my brain to function normally. So that was real insight. But I never related the two until much, much later when I started writing again in my second pregnancy.
Don't go anywhere, because up next, Victoria tells me about the hangover that made her go sober. Her wonderful husband, John, had to clean the vomit off her in the bathtub the night before.
And I remember asking, what do you really think about my drinking? And he said, look, you're fine when you're drunk, but I am concerned about your mental health nowadays. You think it's funny, but it's not. I have to deal with you being so unwell for the first 3 days of the week.
And for some people, it's not very difficult to give up alcohol. But Victoria said therapy absolutely saved her.
I discovered very, very quickly that all of my behaviour was based upon my trauma and my low self-esteem and all of the stuff that had happened in my life.
We'll be back shortly. You just reminded me of something really funny that you said when you're talking about John and when you were drinking. Your turn of phrase is just so brilliant. You gave me the term wankered about drunkenness, which I thought Australians had done everything with the word wanker, but I've never heard about someone getting wankered. And then you're talking about when you came home one night and you were just so drunk that John, you said he carried me to the bathroom where he hosed me down like a zookeeper washing a muddy elephant.
It's not a good look.
I'm like, mate, that man.
That morning, the day after that was one hangover too far. He had washed me down. I had a new baby. It was 6 weeks after my daughter was born. I remember getting home. I'd been sick in the taxi. I was just a mess. Absolutely wankered, as you say. I woke up the next day and I'd been having this terrible anxiety, and I'd promised in my second pregnancy that I was going to try and do better, that I was enjoying this lovely window of not drinking and this perfect excuse to say no. And I remember making promises to myself and my children and my husband going, I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better. I'm not going to drink as much. And then 6 weeks after she was born, it had all built up. She'd been poorly and it had been stressful. And of course, the only thing I knew how to do when I was bored, stressed, tired, any emotion whatsoever, even happy, was to celebrate or commiserate with alcohol. So of course, that's what I did. And I woke up the next morning with that hangover after my husband hosing me down in the bath, I think it was. I padded into the lounge and said to my husband, this isn't working. Moderation isn't working. I can't achieve it. I can't do this anymore. Your face is changing. You look worried about me. And I remember asking, what do you really think about my drinking? And he said, look, you're fine when you're drunk, but I am concerned about your mental health nowadays. I am concerned about you. You think it's funny, but it's not. I have to deal with you being so unwell for the first 3 days of the week. And I just knew then that I just couldn't do it on my own anymore. And I had to seek some support.
I actually wrote down what he said because it was a testament to a beautiful man and to a beautiful woman, by the way, and to a beautiful union, because he said, when you said to him, what do you think about my drinking? Which I gather was kind of the first time you'd asked.
Yep, the first time I'd asked anyone.
He said, alcohol sucks all the joy and beauty from you. I'm scared.
Yeah, I was scared too by that point.
Wow.
Everything has to come to a head, and that was it. He was scared and I was scared. I was really scared about my life. I didn't want to be this chaotic mother that was, having play date wines on a Tuesday night. And I always drank more than everybody else. I could see that. I didn't want to be that mum. That's not how I pictured myself. And because it was so normalized, like mummy drinking culture is, I just thought, well, this is what everybody does. This is how my mates parent. It's okay. This is okay. But that morning, it wasn't okay. I couldn't look after my child again. Yeah, everybody knows parenting with a hangover is a complete nightmare. I couldn't do it. And I just knew, do I want to carry on this tradition? Do I want my children to have a choice about alcohol, or can I do something about this? At that moment, I thought I want to learn how to drink better. I never thought I would ever be sober. I thought I'm going to learn how to have one drink and leave. But it became apparent after getting therapy that was never, ever going to be an option for someone like me.
So when you've had that conversation with your husband, the love of your life, the father of your children, what do you do? What's your step? Where do you turn to?
I had no idea what to do. I Googled help for addiction because I guess, well, maybe because I can't stop, therefore maybe I have an addiction issue. I thought it sounded like a word I didn't relate to, nor did I relate to the term alcoholic. I just thought I'm a weird binge drinking mum who probably has too many shots on a night out. I thought my drinking was still frivolous, but I knew it was having impact and I really didn't know where to turn. I remember the first thing coming up was like going to the Amazon to try ayahuasca with a shaman, which quite honestly I was quite into. I would quite like to do that. Sounded quite appealing.
I've got a friend who did that. There's a lot of vomiting, apparently.
A lot of vomiting, and I think you can end up being on a never-ending trip with a dragon following you forever. I think it sometimes doesn't go so
that you
well.
never return.
You never return. Be wandering around the Amazon jungle for the rest of my life. So I had 2 kids by that point, so that wasn't an option. I eventually just Googled help for over drinking, and I found this incredible woman called Diane Spencer. I called her up and said, hello, I'm a silly mum who drinks too much and it's affecting me and my family and I need some help. And I thought she'd say, don't worry about it, love. This is for real alcoholics. But she didn't. She just said, see you Monday. And that was that.
And what happened on Monday?
Well, I nearly turned around and went to the pub, I can tell you. I was nervous.
What were you nervous about?
I was scared that she was going to tell me I couldn't drink anymore because that wasn't something I wanted to do. I wanted her to train me to be a good drinker. I was scared that I would disappoint everybody and that everybody wouldn't like me anymore, or that people would think I was a bit of a wuss for going to therapy. I just had a lot of questions about it and I didn't want to dig up the past. I felt like my past wasn't relevant at that point. I just thought, this is a now issue. I'm drinking too much now. It's making me ill now. It's got nothing to do with, my promiscuity or the thing that happened at school or the tsunami or blowing my finger off. I just thought all those things have happened. I just swept it all under the carpet as part of my chaotic life, my chaotic adventure. I never ever thought that that stuff was still affecting me or that perhaps it was sad or that it deserved attention. So I was scared about dredging all of that stuff up because I just wanted her to give me a result and go, this is what's wrong with you and this is how you can slow down your drinking. But when I got there, I discovered very, very quickly that all of my behavior was based upon my trauma and my low self-esteem and all of the stuff that had happened in my life.
When you came face to face with yourself and the truth of the past and how it had affected you, how did that feel in those initial hours?
There's a lot of self-reflection and it feels overwhelming at first. But over weeks of learning, that sounds very self-indulgent going to therapy, but I recommend everyone does it because it's like laying out a pack of cards on the table. And I was able to see my life, all the different parts of it, all the different cards with all the different colours and times. I was able to go, right, what are the bits that I didn't like about myself? Where was I going wrong? And I was able to take them out and look at the cards and go, that didn't serve me. That situation was bad. I'm going to take it out. And I managed to, it's like having a dilapidated old house and deciding to mow it down and rebuild yourself. So I was able to take out the parts that I liked about myself and work on them and build a new foundation for my life. I was able to go, right, this is where I've been going wrong. One of the best things that I did in therapy was after one of our sessions, Diane said to me, go home and write down all the things that you think are bad that have happened in your life and bring it to me next week. And I brought it to her and I swear to you, it was worse than Santa's naughty list. Right. And I had a list of all of the terrible things that I'd done. And she said, read them out loud to me. And I read them out loud and I added the word not okay. And it was like sleeping with random people, not okay. Being arrested, not okay. And it made it very clear. And Diane said to me, who is that person? What do you think about that person on that piece of paper? I was like, she sounds absolutely crazy. It sounds like someone who doesn't care about themselves. She was like, do you care about yourself? I'm like, yes, I do. And actually it made me realize that from an outsider's point of view, I looked like an alcoholic, quite honestly. I looked like somebody who was completely out of control. And it really took me time to separate these two people and actually cut off who I used to be and learn to rebuild myself again.
And that brings you to a whole new phase of life when you embark upon sobriety.
Yeah.
Because everyone I know who's experienced it says it not only enacts change in yourself, but that has a ripple effect into your wider circle. So friends fall away and you realise relationships are not necessarily what they were. What happened for you when you stopped drinking?
Well, while I was there, I learned that I was a huge people pleaser and I had to work on that and I had to let go of many situations from the past, like for instance with those girls and heal myself a little bit. And during that process, the opinion of others didn't seem to matter anymore. I sort of healed myself and realized what was important, and that was my husband and my children. Nothing else seemed to matter anymore. And the opinions of others sort of, fell away, which you can imagine is extremely empowering. I stepped out of that last therapy session going, actually, I don't really care what people think about me anymore. And I'm going to do something for the first time in my life. I'm getting emotional, sorry. That is for me. I'd spent so long doing everything for everybody else. I'm going to do this for me, and I'm going to be kind to myself for the first time. And it felt like such a huge relief to take 26 years of heavy binge drinking off my shoulders, this expectation of who people wanted me to be, and throw it in the bin and just go, right, this is a new version of me. So in fact, the repercussions were that friends did fall away, but I actually didn't care that much, because I thought, well, if you're not here for me, I've been here for you. Like, you were mates with me because you probably thought it was funny when I was rolling around on the dance floor. I kept everybody entertained. And if you're not sticking around for actually me taking care of myself anymore, well, that's your choice. So the repercussions in my friendship groups, there were some people that didn't like this sort of new, like spandangly version of me, but that was okay. I didn't mind it either.
Clear-eyed.
Very clear-eyed. Yeah. It's quite a liberating feeling.
Well, everyone kind of dreams of liberation in their life. Even when you were saying you didn't care what people thought, I was like, oh, I would like a bit of that.
What a wonderful way to live your life. I mean, sometimes it creeps up on me again nowadays, but I think I was so conscious of keeping others happy that literally along the line I'd forgotten about myself. I refer in the book as that I'd been picking petals off a daisy for years and years and years, going, I love me not. And I had to start taking care of myself, which meant it would follow on. Like, my kids would have a more present mum. My husband's face could be happy again. Nobody needed to worry about me because I was beginning to own who I was. And that's taken me 6 years. I've been sober for 6 years now. I started writing the book on the day that I gave up drinking. So that's been a massive process and a really interesting therapy for me as well. To be somebody now who doesn't drink is fully liberating. It's like stepping out of a jail and seeing sun for the first time. In my youth, I used to travel to France on summer holidays, and we used to hold our breath when we used to go through these long motorway tunnels. And I often describe sobriety as like coming out of the tunnel and being on the other side of it and just seeing the sunshine and going, okay, I can really start living my life now, and I can trust myself. It was a lot about trust. When alcohol was near me, you couldn't trust me, and I couldn't trust myself around it. And I had to learn to have my own back. And that's taken a long time. And now I trust myself, which is liberating, and it causes confidence. It's like a repercussion of trusting yourself is owning who you are. And now I can step into any social situation, know that I'm still fun, know that I don't need to drink, which is a huge relief. That whole preoccupation with alcohol has gone, and I can just be who I am. And if people don't like that, that is out of my control.
Do you think the trusting yourself is the key to it? But like you said, you couldn't be trusted. Did it take your husband a long time to trust you?
No, he's never not trusted me. He was just worried about me. All John has done on this process is never ever judged me and just taken my hand when I needed his help. He has sat back and watched this unfold on a day-to-day basis because he trusted me so much that he knew that I could do it. And my parents often say to me, Victoria, was this our fault? And I say no to my mum and dad. They taught me to be invincible. And what they created, even though they drank and even though they had parties, was somebody that was strong enough to address a drinking issue and to continue to address it and to teach others to address it. So everything that I've learned, I don't blame anyone. I realized early on in my sobriety that blaming others was futile. It was going to hurt people. If I said, it was my culture, my environment, it was my mum and dad, it was being a teenager, it was those girls at school, how is that going to help me move forward? I decided that I was going to blame myself. That was the only way I was going to choose to get better. I was going to stop that hand coming from my body and reaching for a bottle of wine. I was going to be in control of my actions for the first time ever. And that is about trusting myself, which has all sorts of other mental and physical repercussions. It just means that you become more confident in who you are. It wasn't about alcohol in the end. I say to people very, very often, this is about finding out who you were before alcohol, which was a confident, happy child. And then I used it for various reasons. But then it's about finding out who comes after. It's not about alcohol. It's about learning to love the person who comes after alcohol. And that may take some time, which is why people do it for a year or 1 month or all these times. But it's a long-term sobriety that leads you into finding out what you're made of. And as mums, we're better than this. Why write ourselves off every weekend? Why do we need alcohol to numb out our children? Or it's really bad messaging saying, we're going to drink because of your behavior. So it's really addressed a lot of things for me. I realized that I was using alcohol to numb out pain from the past and because of all the mundane and being boring and all of these fears. And it's just been so interesting to unravel all of that and see the reality and see alcohol, see the bigger picture, what it really is doing and what it was doing to me all my life.
Like a bad friend, but was a friend, or you believed alcohol to be a friend for such a long time. Is there anything that you miss about that bad friend?
No, nothing. I don't miss anything about it, honestly, now. Occasionally, if I've had a really long day and somebody walks past me with a cold, frothy beer, it's not that I want it. It's just that it triggers a memory for me and I go, oh yeah, I remember I used to do that. But then I have this saying, which is play the tape forward. It was never that one beer. It was 2 beers, 3 beers, shots, and finding my nan's bottle of port under the sink and tripping over and being sick and having anxiety. If I see alcohol, I remember it and go, that was never, ever helpful for me in my life. It just made me wobbly, just acts like a complete lunatic a lot of the time. So I just can see it for what it is. I've educated myself. It gave me massive anxiety. I don't know whether you've listened to that Huberman podcast on alcohol. Highly recommend it. 1 glass of wine raises your anxiety by 25% all the time. So if you're having 1 glass of wine, and I often start to realize that I was giving alcohol credit for every night out that I had. I was saying I had a good night because I was drunk. But now I have a good night. It's not the booze. It was my friends. It's the music. It's the environment. It's my attitude. It's the ambience in the room. It's all of these things that make me happy. It's the simple things. It's not pouring a Class A carcinogen down my throat. It's actually the simple things in life that I connect to now. Like, I'm one of those weird tree huggers nowadays. And I save an ant from the swimming pool. I care about the simple things, and the chaos is gone. Even though some people might think I'm boring now, I kind of am embracing boring and going, for me, boring brings contentment, and it brings long walks on the beach and time with my family and all of the things that really bring beautiful memories and joy into my life.
Boring is not blowing your finger off with a firecracker at Koh Phangan.
Yeah, that is true. I've still got 9 left. My friends used to call me the clock because I've got one hand bigger than the other.
Does your husband drink?
It's funny, this leading by example thing. My plan was to be the cycle breaker for my kids, but I've ended up being the cycle breaker for my husband too. He stopped drinking about 1.5 years ago. I never asked him to. He was never a problem drinker. I think he's just in the background been listening to me harping on about sobriety, and he's just naturally stopped as well. So we actually have an alcohol-free household now, which some people find quite weird. It's what makes us happy, and it means, what I really hope is it means that my kids are able to have a choice about alcohol, unlike I did. I hope that my choices ripple through to them and they are able to decide whether they do or not, because perhaps I didn't have that choice, as I said at the beginning. So I hope that it gives them the choice and that they make the right choices. But I can't guarantee that. I have had another child in my sobriety as well, which has been absolutely lovely. I had a child at 42, which was a lovely surprise. it's nice to not be the person who is just using alcohol to numb them out, which is what I did in the beginning. And they will never know me as a drinker, which is a lovely feeling. It means that I'm very present. I'm not perfect. I'm a terrible mum sometimes. I shout and I'm crazy, but at least I don't drink and at least they won't see me.
And you can't even blame the booze.
I can't. I haven't got anything to blame.
No.
It's very authentic. It's a bit too authentic, quite honestly.
Victoria Vanstone, I wish you every happiness and thank you for sharing so openly your story, because I know how many people it will resonate with, and it's properly a gift to show that the life of sobriety can be embarked upon with such joy and openness.
I think I just want to end by saying that you don't have to be an over drinker to be deserving of healing. You don't have to reach any rock bottoms like I did to reach out for support. Sobriety is an option for everybody. And it's not about alcohol in the end or what you're doing to yourself. It's about you learning to be kind to yourself and learning to be kind to your body. And that's what it's ended up being about for me. And just knowing, no matter where you sit on this vast alcohol spectrum, that there are people who can talk to you about it and there is support out there and there are people interested in your story, no matter how big or small it is. Don't reach those rock bottoms. Stop now and get the help that you deserve.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
Victoria's story is so powerful because drinking, at least in Australia, is an epidemic. But it seems increasingly that people are questioning the role that alcohol plays in their social life and their personal life, and a lot of people are trying to give it up. I know so many people who'll be able to relate to Victoria's story. A lot of sobriety stories have this common ending. I mean, if the sobriety is successful, which is learning to love yourself and caring less about what people think of you. But sometimes that's just so many words. The living it is the hardest thing that you will ever do. We'll put a link in our show notes to Victoria's new book, 1,000 Wasted Sundays, and a link to the podcast she co-hosts called Sober Awkward. It's also funny. Little bit awkward, but also very helpful. This ep of No Filter was produced by Kimberly Bradish, who is herself 62 days sober. The executive producer is Mia Freedman, with sound production by Leah Porges. And I'm Kate Langbroek. Thanks so much for joining us.